If you had sat in a schoolroom during the 1800s, chances are your desk would have been bare except for a single slate. That's right, the humble chalkboard. This simple piece of technology was used by children and teachers throughout the century to learn everything from arithmetic to penmanship. But did you know there's more to this old school tool than meets the eye? In this episode of Everything You Wanted to Know, we Lines get up close and personal with the chalkboard and explore how it shaped the minds of generations past. Before we dive into the chalkboard itself, let's first talk about the writing implements used by students of the 1800s. In an age before computers, televisions, and smartphones, children had only a few ways to pass the time. Drawing, painting, sculpting, and playing with dolls were popular pastimes for girls, while boys were more likely to build with blocks, play with toy soldiers, and engage in imaginary combat. Of course, there was also reading, which was considered an essential skill for children of all genders. But unlike today, when kids can read whatever they like, whenever they want, books in the 1800s were expensive and rare. As a result, many schools relied on textbooks to teach basic literacy skills. And what better way to share these books among dozens of students than by having them take turns holding them while everyone else read along? So, if you were a child in the 1800s, chances are you spent plenty of time holding books while your classmates read. Not only did this help you develop your fine motor skills, but it also gave you a chance to see what was inside some of the world's most popular books without ever owning one yourself. But once children learned to read, they needed somewhere to practice their new skills. Enter the chalkboard, also known as a slate in America. Despite its name, this simple piece of technology is anything but basic. In fact, it remains one of the most versatile pieces of equipment ever invented. The modern equivalent of the chalkboard is still used in classrooms around the world today. What makes it so useful? Well, for starters, it's cheap and easy to produce. Unlike paper, which requires trees and ink, a slate is just a flat slab of stone. Can be inscribed with letters, numbers, and symbols using chalk or other dry writing materials. Another benefit of the chalkboard is its durability. While a sheet of paper will tear or rip eventually, a slate can last for centuries. Take, for example, the ancient Greek and Roman slates that have survived to this day. They were used to teach future generations of students thousands of years ago, and now they're kept in museums around the world. Finally, the chalkboard's portability is unmatched. It's lightweight and easy to transport, which makes it ideal for schools that need to move their equipment frequently. When combined with its low cost and long lifespan, this portability means that schools can outfit every student with a slate without breaking the bank. In the 1800s, chalkboards were made of slate, a type of metamorphic rock that's naturally resistant to weathering and erosion. This made it perfect for use in schools where students would be constantly writing on the boards. The slate was cut into thin slabs, then ground down until smooth. The resulting boards were typically around 12 inches wide and 18 inches long, with each side coated with a layer of black slate. This made it easy to write on them with chalk, which is why we call them blackboards today. To clean the boards between lessons, students would use a rag or their sleeves to wipe away the chalk dust. This left them looking nearly brand new, ready for the next student to pick up and start learning. But while chalkboards may seem like a simple piece of equipment, they actually represent a major shift in how humans have approached education. Before the invention of the chalkboard, children were expected to learn by listening to their teachers lecture. This meant that only the most verbal and charismatic instructors were able to keep their students engaged. However, as societies became more literate, it became clear that students needed to practice writing as well. This led to the development of the chalkboard, which allowed students to learn by doing. They could see the lessons in front of them and practice what they had just heard. This approach proved so effective that it's still used in classrooms today. Chalkboards aren't just effective because they're cheap and portable. They're also incredibly versatile. Because a chalkboard can be erased and rewritten countless times, it's possible for teachers to present a variety of different lessons on them. For example, a math teacher could use a chalkboard to solve complex equations, or a history teacher could use it to map out the timeline of an important war. Additionally, the chalkboard's large surface area allows multiple students to write on it simultaneously. This encourages collaboration and helps students learn from one another. So, what exactly did students write on chalkboards? Well, the answer depends on what they were learning. In elementary school, students would often practice their penmanship by copying letters and words from the board. They might also practice basic arithmetic problems. Once they mastered these skills, they moved on to more advanced concepts. For example, in high school, students might use the board to diagram chemical reactions or plot points on a graph. No matter what they were learning, though, one thing remained constant: the importance of practice. Writing on a chalkboard wasn't just a way for students to learn, it was also a way for them to demonstrate their knowledge. At the end of a lesson, students would often be asked to write out everything they had learned. This helped them remember what they had studied and gave their teachers a chance to see whether or not everyone was keeping up. Unfortunately, not all students took advantage of this opportunity. Some were lazy or didn't care about their grades, so they would often scribble down random words or refuse to write anything at all. However, most students understood the importance of impressing their teachers. They knew that if they put forth the effort to write something thoughtful and original on the board, they would earn extra credit or even an A on their next quiz. While chalkboards were popular in the 1800s, they weren't the only writing surface used by students. In some schools, children would write on slates, small pieces of glass that could be wiped clean with a cloth. Slates were cheaper than chalkboards, but they were also less durable and more difficult to write on. As a result, they fell out of favor as the century wore on and larger boards became more common. Still, slates have made a comeback in recent years as a way to reduce waste and promote sustainability. In addition to their practical benefits, chalkboards also served an important symbolic function in the 1800s. They represented the authority of the teacher and the importance of learning. After all, it was the teacher who had the power to erase what was written on the board and start anew. This gave instructors a great deal of control over their students and allowed them to emphasize certain concepts while ignoring others. For example, if a teacher wanted to make sure that his class understood the importance of honesty, he might write the word honesty on the board in large letters. He might then ask his students to copy the word down into their notebooks and explain what it meant to them. This is just one example of how chalkboards were used in the 1800s to teach moral lessons. Many teachers also used them to write down rules for behavior or to remind their students of important dates and events. By controlling what was written on the board, teachers could shape their students' understanding of the world and instill in them the values they believed were important. Today, chalkboards are no longer the primary teaching tool in most classrooms. They've been replaced by smart boards and other interactive technology. However, they remain popular in some private schools and homeschooling families. Chalkboards are also commonly used in public spaces such as restaurants and bars. This is partly because they're cheaper than other types of advertising, but it's also because they have a certain timeless quality to them. A chalkboard sign looks classic and elegant no matter how it's used. In conclusion, chalkboards are an important part of the educational landscape in the 1800s. They were used by students and teachers to learn everything from basic arithmetic to advanced algebra. The chalkboard's versatility, portability, and affordability made it the perfect teaching tool for the 1800s. In addition to being practical, the chalkboard also had an important symbolic function. It represented the authority of the teacher and the importance of learning. By controlling what was written on the board, teachers could shape their students' understanding of the world and instill in them the values they believed were important. Today, chalkboards are no longer as common as they once were, but they remain popular in some schools and businesses. Whether you're learning your multiplication tables or ordering a drink at a bar, there's something timeless and elegant about a chalkboard that continues to appeal to us today. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Everything You Wanted to Know. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Until next time, happy learning. All right, let's get back to school. Last time we talked about how kids used to study by reading and reciting from a slate. But as children advanced, they graduated to more advanced academic tools like copybooks and quill pens. They may sound old-fashioned, and they are. But before computers, textbooks, and ballpoint pens took over, these tools played a major role in educating generations of American children. First up, the ABCs. No, I don't mean those, although we'll get to them in a moment. I mean actual alphabet blocks. In the early days of American schools, students didn't have fancy computer games to help them learn their letters. Instead, teachers pulled out wooden blocks engraved with letters, numbers, common objects, and other symbols. Students arranged them in various combinations to make words and sentences. Kids could also practice sounding out letters and syllables. They would turn the blocks so that one letter faced forward and then repeat this process until they could spell out whatever word they were trying to figure out. This hands-on method was great for kinesthetic learners, those who learn best by doing. And it was versatile enough to be used across different grade levels and for many subjects. Plus, it kept students engaged and encouraged teamwork. That is when they weren't getting in trouble for making too much noise or knocking someone else's blocks over. Okay, now it's time for the ABCs. No, not those. I mean these. For grades 1 through 6, students used these little books called spelling books, primers, or sometimes simply readers. They contained lists of words organized by difficulty, along with simple sentences that demonstrated how to use them. So, for example, here's a list of words from one primer that starts easy and gets harder and harder. Man, men, black, big black bag. The book might include a sentence like this. The man saw a big black bag. It was his. Then the sentence becomes a little more complicated. When the boy saw the big black bag, he ran. And finally, despite all warnings, the silly goose ran off with the bag. These books were especially useful because they taught students how to use new words in context. They could see how a word was spelled and how it sounded, but they could also see how that word fit within a whole sentence. Sometimes these readers included stories specifically written for the book. Other times they included excerpts from longer works. Eventually, students would graduate to books like this, primers for reading, writing, and spelling. They used the same basic concept of starting with simple words and sentences and gradually increasing the difficulty. But they also served as textbooks for reading comprehension. They contained selections from various authors, along with exercises that helped students improve their reading skills. Once children had mastered these books, they moved on to something more challenging, the copybooks. As children advanced, they graduated from slates to copybooks. These were paper notebooks, often filled with lined pages designed to guide neat handwriting. On the top line, the teacher or sometimes a printed text would provide a sentence or proverb. Beneath it, the student copied the words carefully, practicing penmanship. Now, before they could do any copying, though, they had to get their hands on some ink and a quill. The quill pen, trimmed from the feather of a goose, was the writing instrument of choice. Dipped into ink, it required a steady hand. Ink blotted easily, and a careless movement could ruin an entire page. Patience was necessary, and neatness was a point of pride. Students copied not just words, but lessons, moral sayings, patriotic verses, even biblical passages. In this way, handwriting practice doubled as moral training, reinforcing the values that society expected children to embody. And if you want to learn more about life as a student during this time period, stay tuned because next time we're going to look at what a day in the life of a student was actually like. So moving on, once students had mastered the basics of reading and writing, it was time to tackle arithmetic. No surprise, they didn't have a calculator for this, but instead used something called a slate. A slate was a piece of hard, smooth material, usually slate rock, but sometimes wood that had been cut and smoothed to a flat surface. It was about the size of a sheet of paper and served as a kind of dry erase board. Students would cover it with a thin layer of chalk dust, which could be wiped off with a cloth. Using a piece of chalk or a slate pencil, the student could write down equations and work out problems. At first, they practiced simple sums, then as they advanced, the equations became more complex. Some slates came with a handle so students could hold them like a chalkboard, while others could be propped up against something like a tree during outdoor lessons. When they finished a problem, students could rub the slate clean and start a new one. Unlike textbooks, a slate was reusable, which made it an economical choice for schools that had to outfit many students with learning materials. Even if students did make a mistake, all they had to do was wipe it away and start again. It also gave them a chance to practice mental math. By erasing some of the numbers in a sum, the teacher could challenge a student to solve the equation without writing anything down. Slates were also useful for students to take notes, although they had to be careful not to spend too much time copying the teacher's words and instead focus on learning the information. All in all, slates provided a low-cost, flexible, and portable way for students to practice their arithmetic skills. And after that came the McGuffey Readers. Arguably no school book series had a greater impact on American education than the McGuffey Readers. Named for their creator, William Holmes McGuffey, these readers were first published in the 1830s and used well into the 20th century. They were designed to teach young Americans how to read and instilled in them a set of values that were considered important at the time, such as religion, morality, and patriotism. The series consisted of 6 readers, each building on the last. The first reader introduced simple words and phonics, while later volumes introduced more complex vocabulary, stories, and lessons. Most importantly, the readers were incredibly popular with children. They contained a mix of original stories and selections from famous authors that made reading enjoyable. Many students looked forward to reading their McGuffey books, which made learning to read easier and more effective. The McGuffey Readers were also highly regarded by teachers and parents. They were affordable, easy to use, and aligned with the values they wanted to pass on to their children. The series was so successful that it spawned imitators and inspired other educational endeavors. Okay, thanks for coming along on this trip back to school. If you enjoyed this quick look back at early American education, check out our other videos on life in America's classrooms. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. See you next time. What do you think was the most popular book series in the 19th century? Was it The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes or maybe Jane Eyre? Well, that's debatable. But there is no doubt that the most widely used series of books during that time belonged to a teacher named William McGuffey. That's right. These readers helped shape the minds of 5 generations of American school children between 1837 and 1920. So let us get started. The content was designed to teach literacy, yes, but also morality. Stories emphasized honesty, hard work, obedience, and faith. It wasn't unusual for young readers to come across moral lessons like these. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived with her mother in a small house near a wood. One day, while gathering firewood with her dog, she discovered a ring hidden under some leaves. The girl could have kept the ring, but instead brought it home to show her mother. Together they searched for the owner. And when they finally found him, the girl returned the ring and made a new friend. The boy was so grateful that he gave her the very first apple from his tree. And the author would add this moral: honesty is the best policy. This was typical of the stories that filled these pages. The vast majority of stories had a clear moral, and they were written to instruct young readers on how to behave. The series didn't just teach kids how to read, they taught them how to be good, God-fearing citizens. In an era before standardized curricula, the McGuffey readers served as a unifying thread, bringing a consistent educational foundation to schools across America. They became especially important after the Civil War, when many states struggled to establish public school systems. The readers provided a common text, a way for teachers to impart not just literacy, but shared values. What's more, these books weren't meant to be merely textbooks. Children read aloud from these books, their voices rising and falling together. The rhythm of the words, the cadence of the language became a part of American childhood. This oral tradition gave way to a love of literature and fostered a sense of community among students. The readers became almost as important as the Bible in the classroom, a fixture in American households for generations. But hold on a minute. You may wonder why we're talking about a primer here on a history channel. Well, because primers like these were the backbone of schooling. Back then, the road to advanced studies began with mastering the alphabet. These early readers were not just about teaching letters, but about laying the groundwork for a literate society. They were the entry point into a world of knowledge, the first step on a path that could lead to professional success. Imagine if someone handed you the last book in a multi-part series expecting you to understand it without any context. That's what education was like without a strong foundation in reading. The McGuffey readers provided that foundation for countless students, shaping not only their academic careers, but their understanding of the world. Next up, we've got these arithmetic books. Now, these are pretty straightforward. They don't have fancy titles or engaging stories, but let me tell you why they are crucial to our journey through the history of math education. We tend to think of math as a universal language, a set of rules and formulas that are the same everywhere. But how was math taught in the past? Well, it turns out it wasn't all that different. In the 1800s, teaching math was less about chalkboards and textbooks and more about simple, practical books often referred to as ciphering books. And guess what? They worked. These books were designed for self-study, which was great because back then, having a math teacher was a luxury that many schools couldn't afford. But don't think for a second that learning math was easy. Students had to buy these books themselves, and it wasn't cheap. So many kids shared them, passing them around until every page was worn thin. Inside these books, you'd find everything from basic operations addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to more complex problems. But even those complex problems were rooted in everyday life. For example, a problem might ask, if a farmer sells 12 eggs for 3 cents each, how much money does he earn? This wasn't some abstract puzzle. It was directly tied to the work and trade that children saw all around them. Learning math wasn't just about solving equations. It was about understanding the world around them and how to use numbers in real-life situations. And let's not forget about the tools these students used. No calculators allowed, folks. These budding mathematicians did everything by hand, no erasers either. Mistakes were left in as a reminder, a testament to the hard work that went into mastering even the simplest sum. Sometimes students went beyond their textbooks, creating their own cipher books by hand. They'd copy examples and solutions into personal notebooks, effectively making their own custom textbooks. These handwritten volumes didn't just teach math, they became keepsakes, a record of their progress, and an offering of hope for a future built on education. After conquering arithmetic, it was time to tackle higher-level math. Enter the higher branches, a collection of books covering everything from algebra to trigonometry. Let's explore this fascinating period of mathematical education. These books were the stepping stones to higher education, the bridge between the practical arithmetic of everyday life and the theoretical world of advanced mathematics. But don't be fooled into thinking this was the easy street. The higher branches required dedication, focus, and a whole lot of practice. Let's start with some basics. These books were primarily designed for male students. Girls were generally steered towards more domestic-focused subjects like home economics or literature. However, there were exceptions. Some ambitious young women did break the mold and pursue advanced math studies, proving that gender was no barrier to intellectual achievement. Now, what kind of math were these books teaching? Well, imagine a curriculum that challenged students to understand the principles of algebra, explore trigonometric functions, and delve into the mysteries of the calculus. These were the topics that filled the pages of these higher branches, laying the foundation for future scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. But how were these books used? Picture this: rows upon rows of desks, each holding a student intently focused on their book, working through problems both large and small. Teachers acted as guides, offering explanations and helping students navigate the complexities of these subjects. It was a system that relied heavily on memorization and repetition, a tried and true method that helped students grasp even the most challenging concepts. And let's not forget about the sheer volume of work involved. Mastering the higher branches wasn't a quick endeavor. Students were expected to spend hours poring over problems, ensuring they understood every step of the way. It was a test of patience, determination, and most importantly, a love of learning, but the payoff was significant. Those who successfully navigated the higher branches opened doors to a world of opportunities. They gained not just a mastery of math, but the skills and discipline needed to succeed in any field. In an era where education was increasingly valued, this was a pathway to personal and professional growth, a chance to make a mark on the world. So, if you ever come across one of these old math books, take a moment to appreciate the dedication and hard work that went into every page. Remember the students who sat for hours, pencil in hand, unlocking the secrets of the higher branches. Their pursuit of knowledge, their thirst for understanding, serves as an inspiration for all of us who value the power of education. Now, the next chapter in our story takes us into the realm of the classics. These books were the cornerstones of ancient literature, but how did students engage with them in the 1800s? Let's dive in and find out. Imagine a classroom buzzing with activity. Students are gathered around their teacher, their eyes shining with curiosity as they listen intently to every word. The teacher opens a well-worn copy of a classic novel and begins to read. The students lean in, eager to hear the latest installment of the captivating tale. This wasn't just a pastime, it was an integral part of their education. The classics, books like Shakespeare's plays and works by renowned authors, were more than just stories. They were a window into different worlds, different times, and most importantly, different ways of thinking. Through these tales, students were exposed to a wealth of knowledge, not just about the world as it was, but about the human condition, about love, loss, joy, and sorrow. But how did students interact with these timeless stories? Did they simply sit and listen as the teacher droned on? Far from it. These classrooms were lively, engaging places where students were encouraged to participate, to ask questions, and to share their thoughts. After all, education wasn't just about receiving information. It was about fostering critical thinking, creativity, and a lifelong love of learning. Moreover, these classics weren't confined to the classroom. They were read and discussed at home, becoming a shared experience for families and communities. Parents would read aloud to their children, and then those children would pass on the stories to their own offspring, thus ensuring that these tales continued to be told for generations to come. But it wasn't all about passive listening. Students were also expected to perform. They would recite passages from memory, act out scenes from the plays, and even write their own adaptations of the stories. This active engagement helped them internalize the lessons, the morals, and the values that the classics had to offer. In an era when entertainment was scarce, these stories provided a welcome distraction, a chance to escape from the everyday and immerse oneself in the adventures of characters from long ago. It was a shared experience that brought people together, a common ground that transcended social boundaries. As the centuries passed, these classics continued to shape the literary landscape. They inspired new works of art, music, and literature, leaving an indelible mark on Western culture. And while the methods of teaching may have changed, the importance of these stories has remained constant. They are a testament to the enduring power of literature, a reminder that the lessons and insights found in ancient texts are just as relevant today as they were yesterday. Next, we'll be delving into the fascinating world of scientific study in the 1800s, from physics to natural history. These subjects captivated young minds and sparked a curiosity about the world that continues to inspire us today. Stay tuned to find out more. One-room schoolhouses are still standing, empty and silent in many American towns. What happened to them? Why did one-room schoolhouses suddenly vanish from American life? And what kind of education did children actually get inside them? From the late 1800s through the mid-20th century, about 90% of rural American children attended a one-room schoolhouse. But the rise of consolidated schools with multiple grades and dedicated teachers for each has gradually replaced them. Today, only about 400 students in the entire United States attend a one-room schoolhouse. One-room schoolhouses offered an intimate learning environment, but the quality of education varied wildly based on factors such as the teacher, community support, and available resources. Even so, historians have romanticized the one-room schoolhouse as a quintessential element of American life. So, what made them work? What were their biggest challenges? And how did they ultimately disappear? The simplest feature of one-room schoolhouses is also what gave them their biggest challenge, the fact that there was only one room. The entire school took place within a single classroom. The teacher faced rows of desks where students of all ages sat together. Typically, the youngest students would sit up front and the oldest in the back. This arrangement wasn't ideal because young children needed a different kind of instruction than teenagers. Young students needed more rest, more games and activities, and shorter periods of focused study time. But that was impossible when teenagers were sitting right next to them. Still, some teachers tried their best to differentiate instruction for students of different ages. For example, a teacher might use the blackboard to write problems for older students while reading aloud to younger ones. In addition to age differences, there was also a wide range of ability among students. Some could barely read, while others had finished high school textbooks by the end of the year. Students often learned at vastly different paces, and a one-room schoolhouse couldn't accommodate everyone's needs. The wide age and ability ranges meant that there was no room for specialization. Every subject had to be taught by a single teacher, which was problematic for advanced students. Imagine you're a gifted high schooler. Would you rather listen to your teacher explain fractions to a second grader, or would you prefer to work on algebra? On top of this challenge, imagine going to school without any books. That's exactly what students had to do. Textbooks were too expensive for most one-room schoolhouses. To keep costs down, communities would often purchase a set of slate boards and slates for students to write on. Most students brought their own pencils and erasers. They sharpened their pencils with a sharp knife, carefully saving every shaving for later use. The teacher might have some textbooks for reference, but students would have to share them. If a student wanted to take a book home to study, he or she would have to return it the next day unless they didn't mind walking barefoot 8 miles to school in the rain. So if the students didn't have textbooks and the teacher had to teach every subject, how did anyone learn anything? There were 2 ways around these challenges. The first was rote memorization. because students couldn't check their answers in a textbook. They had to memorize everything. They'd memorize vocabulary words, mathematical formulas, state capitals, historical dates, and the periodic table. After all, there was no other way to check their work. The second was repetition. Since there weren't enough books for students to work independently, they had to repeat lessons together. They'd repeat vocabulary words, mathematical equations, state capitals, historical dates, and the periodic table. After all, there was no other way to make sure everyone was learning. But what about more complex subjects like math or history? Did students simply memorize facts until they knew them all? Yes, but not entirely. Rote memorization wasn't always the primary focus. It was certainly important, but memorization was most effective when paired with active learning. Sometimes active learning was formal. The teacher would assign students to be reading, writing, or arithmetic monitors. Reading monitors might spend a week reading a chapter of their textbook aloud. Other students followed along in their own books. Writing monitors might copy sentences from the board while arithmetic monitors solved problems at the blackboard. When they were done, they switched roles and the process started over again. Other times, active learning was informal. Imagine a student raises his hand and asks, "Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving?" The teacher turns to him and says, "Why do you think we celebrate Thanksgiving?" He explains his understanding of the holiday. Other students add their thoughts until they've created a definition of Thanksgiving as a class. Then the teacher writes the definition on the board. Over time, students will eventually memorize the definition. Active learning like this allowed students to engage with material and develop a deeper understanding of it, which improved retention. Plus, students enjoyed this kind of learning. It made school more fun and less like a chore. It wasn't just academics that happened in one-room schoolhouses. Teachers usually expected students to learn manners and etiquette as well. The teacher would lead by example, speaking politely and treating students with respect. Students would greet visitors at the door, address their teacher formally, and call adults by their titles. Good manners extended beyond the classroom as well. Students were expected to be polite to one another and to treat people outside of school with kindness. Teachers believed that a good education wasn't just about academics. It was also about preparing students for life as good citizens. Despite these efforts, the one-room schoolhouse fell out of favor. There were several reasons for this decline. First, consolidation brought more resources to schools. Consolidated schools had access to more money, more supplies, and more specialists like librarians and counselors. Second, consolidation helped improve educational outcomes. As school buildings got bigger, they could hire more specialized teachers. With more teachers, they could split students into smaller classes with fewer students per teacher. This allowed teachers to give more individualized attention to their students. Finally, consolidation helped change the purpose of school. As schools got bigger, they became centers of the community. They hosted plays, dances, town hall meetings, and even church services. No longer were they just places to learn. They were gathering spots for the entire community. And that left the one-room schoolhouse with fewer students, fewer resources, and fewer functions. Some people miss the close-knit nature of the one-room schoolhouse and argue that today's larger schools should try to emulate its practices. Others point out that one-room schoolhouses are relics of the past and their disappearance was inevitable. Which side do you fall on? Do you think one-room schoolhouses can work in today's world? Or are they simply relics of the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, if you love history and want to learn more about amazing stories like this one, stay tuned for new episodes every week. Many of us have fond memories of our favorite childhood books. Maybe you snuggled up with a teddy bear listening to your mom read aloud, or perhaps you can recall a beloved teacher reading stories to your class. But what if I told you that almost every child in America began school this way? Yep, with a good old-fashioned reading lesson. Today, we read taking a look back at early American classrooms and the surprisingly high value of something you probably have lying around the house, a simple slate. Welcome to my channel. Before the invention of paper, slates were an essential writing surface for people all over the world. This particular slate comes to us from the estate of Helen Viola. She grew up in Nebraska in the 1920s and donated her collection of childhood toys and school books to the museum after her passing. So what exactly is a slate? It may seem like a simple piece of hard rock, but these flat slabs of slate were quarried specifically for their smooth, fine-grained texture, making them ideal for writing and drawing. Slates were prized for their durability and could last for generations. In New England, slate quarries first opened in the 1780s, but slate pencils or crayons were quickly invented to help students erase mistakes. These pencils were typically made of slate or other soft materials like bone. Slate was also popular among many cultures worldwide and played an important part in ancient history. In Egypt, for example, slates took the form of stone tablets covered in hieroglyphics. Writing in these ways wasn't easy though, and slates were much easier to come by and less expensive. So people all over the world began using slates to write on. By the time the United States was founded, slates had already been in use for hundreds of years. And as Americans spread westward, they brought their slates with them. Though often overlooked today, the Bible was a central text in many classrooms. Children read verses aloud, memorized passages, and used scripture to practice both reading and moral instruction. For parents and teachers alike, the Bible was more than a religious book, it was a practical tool for shaping character. To learn more about how the Bible was used in early American schools, we spoke with historian Timothy Smith. He said, "It is very common for us to think of religion and schooling as to separate spheres. You know, one is sort of public and one is private. But this is a way of understanding the past that emerged in the late 19th century. Prior to that time, there was no real separation between public and private life. And so things like prayer and Bible reading and religious instruction were considered a natural and necessary part of education. As such, there was really no debate about whether or not to include religious instruction in schools. There simply wasn't that concept of separation yet. Of course, the Bible wasn't the only book used in early American classrooms. We have this 1837 edition of the New England Primer, which is considered one of the most important textbooks in the history of American education. This primer was a compilation of religious and patriotic pieces designed to instill morals and values in young readers. For those just starting out on their reading journeys, primers provided simple lessons and sentences for young learners to practice. Some primers even included illustrations to help children match written letters with spoken sounds. And don't forget the alphabet. The ABCs were drilled into young minds, and the New England Primer was one of the most popular ways of teaching the fundamentals. These early readers helped shape young Americans, and some families even passed down these books from generation to generation. But while many children would have had a primer or Bible to use in their reading lessons, the majority of kids didn't have access to formal textbooks. In poorer communities, parents or teachers sometimes created homemade readers, copying passages onto scraps of paper, maybe using a slate for practice. Children might share a single book, passing it from hand to hand. In these cases, the slate became even more valuable, allowing practice without wasting paper. But there was another way that slates helped make learning possible. Picture it now, the classroom alive with activity. Some children scratch chalk across slates. Others dip quills into ink and copy neat lines of text. A group reads aloud from their McGuffey readers, while another stares at a wall map, tracing rivers with a finger. The tools may be simple, but they carry enormous weight. Each slate, each book, each quill represented a chance to learn. And for many families, especially those who had little, these tools symbolized hope. They were small bridges to a future where their children might read, write, and calculate better than they themselves ever could. These readers are a series of books that were hugely influential in American classrooms during the 1800s. Designed by William Holmes McGuffey, these readers taught basic literacy skills through stories, poems, and essays. The first 6 books in the series were published between 1836 and 1857 and are known as the Eclectic Readers. The remaining 3 books were published after the Civil War and reflected the changing needs of the time. McGuffey's readers were widely adopted throughout the United States and by 1850 had become the most popular series of school books in America. They stayed relevant by updating content and reflecting the current interests of educators. For example, the third reader's preface from 1879 includes an entire section on teaching penmanship, reflecting the growing emphasis on writing skills at the time. It even provides sample sentences for practice. Reading was just one part of a typical day in an early American classroom. Students also practiced their writing and arithmetic skills. Sometimes they did this with a slate. Writing with a slate was simple. Students could write on the smooth surface with chalk or slate pencils and easily erase their mistakes. All they needed to do was wipe the slate clean with a rag. Not only were slates inexpensive and durable, they allowed students to try again and again without wasting paper. These qualities made slates a perfect tool for learning, especially in rural areas. During the 1800s, most schools were one-room schoolhouses. Typically, a single teacher oversaw students from multiple grades, and supplies were often limited. Enter the McGuffey Readers. These cheap, durable books were a staple in one-room schoolhouses across the country. With the right primer or reader in hand, students could practice their reading skills independently while the teacher worked with other students. In fact, the 4th and 5th readers in the series were largely made up of selections that young students could read to themselves. They included everything from fables to patriotic poems to interesting facts about nature and science. The series also encouraged oral readings, meaning students would read aloud for the enjoyment of the whole class. It was a great way for kids to improve their fluency and build confidence. And let's face it, sharing a good story is always fun. Now, the McGuffey Readers weren't just for kids. In a time before radio or television, people of all ages enjoyed reading aloud as a form of entertainment. In fact, the last book in the series, the primary reader for adults, was designed specifically for immigrants and those looking to brush up on their reading skills. So, why were these books so important? The McGuffey Readers changed the way we teach reading. Instead of memorizing long passages, students learned to decode words phonetically, focusing on syllables and context clues. This method, called the phonetic approach, broke reading down into smaller parts, making it easier for young students to grasp. In addition to their focus on reading, the McGuffey Readers also emphasized moral development. Each book contained stories and poems that taught valuable life lessons like honesty, kindness, and respect. These moral tales weren't preachy or overly religious. Rather, they wove ethical teachings into engaging narratives, leaving a lasting impact on young readers. The popularity of the McGuffey Readers can be attributed to their practicality, affordability, and comprehensive approach to education. For many families, especially those living in rural areas, these books were a lifeline to a better future for their children. The legacy of the McGuffey Readers lives on today. While no longer in print, their impact on American education is undeniable. The series helped shape the way we teach reading and instill timeless moral values in generations of young Americans. Today, thanks to the efforts of museums, libraries, and dedicated collectors like Helen Viola, we have the opportunity to preserve these important pieces of history and share them with future generations. If you have an heirloom from your own family that you think would be perfect for a museum, check the links below to see if they might be interested in acquiring it. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. I'll see you next time.